Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse.
This is a very special edition of Burn the Haystack. We're going to be doing a 3-part series, meditations on Easter. I'm super excited for this.
Yes, so wherever you are, I'm sure you're celebrating Good Friday at the moment, having a good Friday.
Oh,
Thank
you for that. Thank you for that. That is excellent.
So welcome. 3-part series. And how you can use this however you want. You can use it as a daily devotional or meditation. You could use it with a small group or share it at a Sabbath school class tomorrow, I guess, or do it as a part of a family worship. Yeah. Whatever. It's just a thought and a meditation from us to you, so we can spend Easter together.
It's awesome.
With all you amazing people.
Quick roadmap for today, tomorrow, and the day after. Today, Good Friday, we're going to be talking about death. Then tomorrow, we're going to be talking about rest. And then on Easter Sunday, we're going to be talking about resurrection, which is going to be pretty cool.
I'm going to keep these short. So I'm just going to start reading. And we're going to go from Luke 23, verses 44 to 49. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. Oh, we've all been on there days where it feels like the sun stops shining.
Isn't that every day in Palmy? Sorry.
And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breast and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things.
So just give you a bit of context. For those of you who know the Jesus story, you probably know where this comes into it. But for those of you who don't, here's what's been happening. Jesus has just completed 3 years of pretty hectic ministry, from casting out demons to healing lame people to teaching these crazy, complicated sermons. He had built quite a following of disciples, of followers, and everybody had expected him to overthrow the Roman government, to establish a new kingdom, to usher in a new age of peace and prosperity for the Jewish people. Instead, what had happened is Jesus had voluntarily allowed himself to be separated from the crowd. He'd been betrayed by one of his own, and he'd been arrested and executed.
And his followers, I suppose, we can see in retrospect, Jesus kind of dropped some hints leading up to this, that this was going to happen. But his followers, they really didn't see it coming. And they were just a wreck. They were destroyed after this. I mean, for them, they just saw everything, their leader, their rabbi, as they would call him, their teacher, their master, the person they've been following for 3.5 years up to this point, killed brutally on a cross. It drags out for quite a while. It's not a quick process. And for them, it's humiliating and it's heartbreaking. And for them, it just would have felt like it's all over.
Yeah, they've been pursuing this dream for so long. And for them, it just seemed like the dream was dead. It was all over Red Rover.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ways we can relate. I think all of us have pursued something like a dream, and then all of a sudden it sort of smashes before our eyes. Or
Yeah, 100%. So whether it's a relationship, that you pursued, you think maybe this person would be the person for you, would be your soulmate perhaps, and it just didn't work out.
Them hashtag breakups.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah,
or even maybe something like a job. You were pursuing a job, you were pursuing a promotion, and they give it to someone else. Oh my
Crushing.
gosh. Yeah, or you don't get the
Crushing.
job, or you get fired. My goodness. It's heartbreaking.
I mean, how many of us have been a part of a church or a community that was really great, a friend group perhaps, that had really brought life and was sustaining and was doing really great things, only for that to just die? I mean, I remember I was talking to a church member who goes to the church that I pastor, and the church that they had attended previous to my church was a beautiful church, had been doing great stuff in the community. And one day, over a period of a year or two, things just started to go downhill. And this church, which was once vibrant and beautiful and life-giving, had shut up shop and was just completely dead.
Wow.
Tragic.
Yeah, and maybe even for you, us reading this, it reminds you of a little. Maybe there's been somebody who's passed away that was close to you, and this has just been recent, or maybe somebody you know is like dying at the moment. I know my church, we just went through a massive, phase of just a whole bunch of deaths at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and it's tragic. The whole church feels it. Our whole community of people are just, a lot of them still recovering.
Yeah. The hard thing is whether you've experienced death literally in your family or in your friend group, or even metaphorically in a relationship, in a dream, when you die, when something that you love dies, or something that you pursue dies, a little part of you dies with it, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's just because you've invested a little part of yourself in this dream. It's like you're actually extracting part of yourself, putting it into this thing that you're pursuing. And then when that thing doesn't work out, or it folds, or it dies, it's like you're dying as well, or a small part of you at least.
And that's, I think it's so hard because, death it's just a part of life.
Yeah.
Seasons, death, and new life. It's all this big part of life. This cycle. Trees go through it. Plants go through it. Animals go through it. But often humans, we feel like we should be exempt or something.
Yeah.
But it's just real. And so, how do you deal with it?
It's fascinating because whilst there is definite tragedy in death, there's also tragedy in life that goes on for too long.
Oh, goodness.
There is tragedy in, we all know the person who's been in a relationship with that other person, and everybody around them can see that it's toxic and it's not good for either of them. And yet, for some reason of loyalty, or because they don't know any better, or because they feel trapped in the relationship, it just continues. And they just continue to slowly kill each other over a long period of time.
Yeah. And even churches. Sometimes there are churches that live beyond.
Yeah.
It feels weird to hear pastors talking about how some churches need to stop, but honestly, there are some churches, and it's more like a hollow shell of the church it used to be.
Everybody talks about the church, how it used to be, rather than how it is now. Yeah. How great it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, and even just ministries within some churches as well. Like people are forcing it to keep running and slaving, and nobody wants to do it, but everybody just keeps forcing it to happen because it just has to happen. So it's this life that has to extend beyond what it was actually meant to extend, to live to.
So there's one inescapable fact that we all have to come to terms with on some level, and that is that everything dies. And sometimes there's nothing we can do about that. But everything dies for a reason and for a purpose. Sometimes this is really hard, but sometimes we have to be okay with that.
Yeah. And that's not to say you're not allowed to grieve and mourn and be sad. That's absolutely normal. And yes, you should be sad. It would be weird if you weren't. Yeah. We're allowed to remember what was. We're allowed to go through that. That's part of being a human. You're not a robot. You're not a log.
Yeah.
If you assume, unless, shout out to logs listening.
But Josh and I, both being pastors, we've sat by plenty of hospital beds of people who are dying or are about to die, and they're a bit elderly perhaps, and they've had a full life, and they've had a good life. They've had regrets. They've had things that they wish they hadn't have done. Of course, that's just part of being human. But there is a certain grace, there is a certain beauty in somebody who has lived a full life and recognizes that and has made the decision that I'm okay with going. I'm okay with closing this chapter and allowing the people around me to move on. There is that's not a decision that you can make for anybody else, but there is beauty and there is grace in that.
Yeah. It's like that Jesus knowing he was going to die and letting it happen.
That's the tough part about it. Like we know throughout the whole story, like Jesus says that if he chose to, the Father could have sent legions of angels down to rescue him on the cross. And
he could have had a unicorn come down on a rainbow, smash the cross, kill the army and ride off,
Could have done it.
Yeah, but instead he chose to let that death happen because he saw beyond.
And it was brutal, and it was unfair, and it was completely and utterly tragic and hope destroying and soul destroying for all his followers. We see that in that last verse, saying that the people who had followed him were beating on their chest. They were distancing themselves because they felt so grief stricken, and also, interestingly enough, they wanted to separate themselves from this so-called criminal because they didn't know what would happen to the followers of this slain Messiah. So sometimes things die and we don't know why they die. And there's only retrospect, I suppose. When we look back on why certain things die, there is a certain level of hindsight, but you can't see that at the time. Hindsight only happens after the fact. And when you're going through a death, you grieve, and it's okay to grieve. And it was okay for the followers of Jesus to grieve. But as we'll find out, after rest, there is resurrection, and the story isn't over. And even when you go through a death, the story isn't over. It might feel like it is, but it's not.
Yeah. So whatever you're going through, maybe it's with a job, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a literal death, be blessed in the thoughts of this story and where it's leading and what's happened. And that's us for today. And we'll see you again tomorrow. That's Josh and Jesse out.